Hi everyone. As Gary said, my name is Vicki. I'm a Public Health Intelligence Advisor on the drugs team at Public Health Scotland. I manage RADAR, which is Rapid Action Drug Alerts and Response. It's a new drugs early warning system. It was set up in June 2022. It was set up to identify trends and threats in real time, particularly new drugs that were emerging, so we could get ahead of the curve. What I've been asked to talk about today though is what's under the radar. What are the elephants in the room? They're not necessarily new drugs or new trends that are emerging, but they're perhaps drug trends that have been going on for a while that we have been neglecting. So as a drugs early warning system, RADAR collects data from a range of different sources and it pulls it all together to provide an overall picture of drug-related harms in Scotland. To start RADAR, we got a multi-agency group together and we decided what does Scotland need out of a drugs early warning system. And we decided on a few key characteristics. Whatever we did, it had to be trusted. People had to trust us that they could send us their sensitive reports anonymously, and that we would look after that data and we would react appropriately to that data. We also had to be trusted because when we put alerts or reports out, we wanted people to share that for maximum impact. So we tried to make it recognisable, we tried to make it look cool. We also tried to make it accessible. And what we mean by it's accessible is anyone can send us a report. You don't need to be a professional, you don't need to be tied to a drug service. You can report in anonymously using a reporting form, or you can send us a report via our mailbox. Anyone can join our network and they can receive all the information that we send out, and we try and make everything publicly accessible on our website. So every 12 weeks, we publish a RADAR quarterly report, ad hoc resources, alerts, emails. You'll see it out in the coffee area. I've left some resources. I've got a couple of hundred booklets. Please take them away so I don't have to take them home with me. So the whole point in it is to rapidly detect harms, because if we can rapidly detect the harms, then we can put steps in to reduce harms. We also believe that by giving people access to current and credible information, that improves their knowledge and confidence related to drug harms, and therefore we're more informed to respond and can save lives. So it had to be trusted, had to be recognisable, it had to be accessible, and another non-negotiable characteristic was that it had to be multi-agency. I can't take credit for this work, Public Health Scotland can't take credit for this work, but right from its very inception, it's been developed, it's designed and it's operated by a huge number of agencies, hundreds of people across Scotland that are feeding information into us that make this a viable system. So because it's a system, it needs to work in a systematic way, and that means all the information that comes to us goes through this 4-step process. We monitor the data, we then validate it, we quality assure it, we check, does this report make sense, is it credible, who's the source, is it corroborated, is there any toxicology to back up the report. If that identifies that there's a potential threat or a change that might have an impact to public health, we then send that to our multi-agency assessment group and they decide what should we do with that information. If it's something quite routine, it could be a case that we put that out in our quarterly report, but if something that's going to have a significant impact to public health, the assessment group might decide to put out an alert. So if we go back to step 1, monitoring, we monitor data from a huge range of different sources. Some of that data is really good, high quality data, such as the National Records of Scotland publication on drug-related deaths. So really good, high certainty data, but it comes to us long after the last death in that time period has occurred. So too late for an early warning system. So what we had to do is go and find other sources of information that we could pull together to get a better picture in real time. So we looked at our data that we have on hospitalisations and emergency department attendances. Normally PHS publish this on an annual basis, again a bit too slow, so now we publish it every 12 weeks. And we looked for new data sources. What are the labs doing? What information can they share with us? And then I think one of the most important things we did is this bottom part of the pyramid here, the reports of harms in communities. In a previous life, when we were seeing reports of Atisalam increasing and people were saying the benzo market was increasing, I would report that to people and they say, aye, but it's anecdotal. So what we've got now is we've got a systematic way to collect that anecdotal information. One report by itself might not necessarily mean something, but if we're getting one report from Inverness and then Fife and then Edinburgh, all about the same pills having the same effect, we can start to look into that a little bit more. So what we do is we look at all this data, a range of different sources, and we see, okay, what's on the radar? What is it that we're dealing with? So what you're seeing here is that bottom level of the pyramid. Since we started radar, we've had over 250 reports from individuals. A lot of these come from people working in drug services, hospitals, some ad hoc reports from the lab, some people that are taking drugs that are reporting their effects into us. And right from day one, the most common drug that we were seeing concerns about, which wasn't really a surprise, was your street benzodiazepines. So about half of all reports that were coming to us were for these street benzos. What they were saying was, we're taking benzos, they look like benzos, they're kind of acting like benzos, but they're making me really heavily sedated. And that gave us our first indication that something in the benzo market was changing. We also saw about a third of all reports that we get are for cocaine. And I fear that in this presentation I'm just going to tell you what you've already heard today. It's benzos, cocaine, causing a lot of the drug harms and concerns that we're seeing. We did have a bit of a cluster of harms due to pre-gabbling, but that was because there was an alert put out that was in the national press, and that generated a bit of interest. So that's what that purple band is in kind of Q3. So what this shows us is that the public services are mainly concerned about benzos and cocaine. But what you can also see is from kind of early 2023 that started to change, and more people were concerned about a heroin supply. So if somebody's taking heroin, acts like heroin, we don't want them to report that to radar, but if they're taking heroin and it gives them a different effect, then that's when they would report to us. And the reports that we were getting in was the heroin was reacting differently. It looked different, it was turning to jelly, it was solidifying before people had the chance to take it. And the most common report was it was resulting in immediate collapse and unconsciousness, which was quite an unusual effect. So what we can see is on the radar from our anecdotal reports, by pulling it all together, is there's huge concerns just now about the heroin supply, but ongoing for many years is the issues that we have with cocaine, Gabapentinoids and benzos. So that's the bottom part of the pyramid. If we move up that pyramid and we look at some of our drug harm indicators, here you can see data from 3 different sources. This is data from the Scottish Ambulance Service, their number of times they've administered naloxone, emergency department attendance data from across Scotland, and suspected drug deaths recorded by Police Scotland. Kieran mentioned that the harms go up in the summertime, and this is our current pattern. As long as these records go back, the drug harms peak in the summer and they come back down. So I think it's an important lesson there that we normally focus our campaigns in the summer, the festivals, or at Christmas time when the services are closing, but actually spring each year is when our drug harms increase. So this data is publicly available. You can get it on the radar dashboard. This shows a national picture here, but you can also go in, you can filter by your local NHS board as well to see how the trends differ from the national average. So looking at 2020 and 2021, this is when we had the highest rated drug-related death on record. We then had things like a lot of investment, we had the national mission, more take-home naloxone, more MAT standards than we had before, and we saw the drug harms come down in 2022, and that was really welcome, and it was also mirrored in our national statistics where we saw a 20% drop in our drug-related deaths. But this is the real importance of an early warning system, is without radar we'd be looking at that data going 20% drop, things are going in the right direction, but actually as of January 2023 the trend started to reverse again, and actually what we've seen is overall in 2023 drug harms were kind of 10-15% higher than they were the year before. So what radar then does is it looks into it and goes, well, what's changed? There was all these efforts to bring it down, it seemed like it's working, what has changed in the last year that might be pushing that back up? It could be something to do with our treatment, it could be something to do with society, the cost of living crisis, and that's where we look to our other sources like toxicology and say, are the drugs that are implicated in these harms changing? I've got quite a few charts in this presentation, and I fear that I don't really show the humanity behind it and the scale of the loss. So before I continued, I just wanted to say that my thoughts are with everybody impacted by drug deaths and harms in Scotland. So people on the street are saying issues with benzos, cocaine and heroin. Our drug harms are increasing again in 2023 and into 2024. So let's go over our toxicology and see what's going on there. An average of one drug emerges onto the European drug scene every 9 days. We don't see that many in Scotland, but we have seen a whole range of drugs that have been detected for the first time in Scotland in the last couple of years. Some of these drugs come onto the radar, they're detected a couple of times and they kind of disappear as quickly as they emerge. Some of these drugs though have the potential to stick around. So we saw atizolam was a new drug, came onto the drug scene and it quickly went from a legal high to being the most implicated drug in drug deaths. And I fear that some of these drugs on this list have the potential to do the same, particularly the nitazines and the depressants. We've also seen a huge range of cannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids, better known as spice, emerging. Mainly we see our spice reports in the prison, but we've had a couple of overdose clusters in Scotland in 2024. A few different groups, but mainly young people where they've been using THC vapes, and it actually contains one of these cannabinoids. So toxicology is really good at identifying the new drugs, but what we need to do is zoom out and go, what are the main drugs that are being used? Because we don't see these new drugs come in and then people stop taking the old ones. People still keep taking the old ones and they just add these ones into the mix. And it's really exacerbating the crisis we have with polydrug use. So in deaths, the average number of drugs implicated in Scotland is 5. In our Assist Hospital Toxicology Project, which is at the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow City, the average number of drugs detected is 6. Most common drugs is cocaine, benzodiazepines. Hazel showed you that huge list of benzodiazepines. In the Assist project, which is only run for 18 months in one of Scotland's hospitals, we've detected 23 different types of benzodiazepines. So it's not just a case that these benzos exist, these benzos are in circulation and are causing harm in our population. What else the Assist study showed us is this is our line here with gabapentinoids. A third of all patients with acute drug toxicity that are part of this study had a gabapentinoid in the mix. And I think this is important to note because the Assist study is just what they call the illicit drugs. So if somebody was prescribed gabapentin, that wouldn't be included in here. So 33% of patients have got gabapentinoids that have not been prescribed. 80% of patients have got benzos that haven't been prescribed. So that takes us to the 3 drugs that we're going to talk about today that you've already heard loads about, but here are the key trends that we are seeing. Benzodiazepines, we're talking about them in generations. So the main generation lasted for decades, so pre-2015, 2016, it was mainly pharmaceutical benzos that people were taking and a rediverted pharmaceutical supply. When the Psychoactive Substances Act came in, this gave an opportunity for the organised crime groups to set up their pill mills and push out these street benzos with far less quality control than our pharmaceutical supply, and as a result we saw our drug deaths go up. In 2021 though, atizolam and alprazolam, our 2 main benzos, were subject to international control. So the United Nations have now banned those 2 drugs, and what that means is the factories that are producing these are now going to have stricter penalties for manufacturing of drugs, so they switched to the next most common benzo. And the one that they switched to was bromazolam. So now we've got our 3rd generation of benzodiazepines. 5 minutes. And I hear you say, God, I've heard this 15 times already today, what's your point? Atizolam went down, bromazolam went up, but the reason I'm harbouring this point is in March 2024, the United Nations subject bromazolam to the same legislation it subjected atizolam to in 2021. So what we're going to see over the next year is a similar decrease to what we see with atizolam. Bromazolam is going to decrease and other drugs are going to take its place. What RADAR does is it tries to, I've been told we can't predict the drugs market, but almost forecast what might be coming. Looking at the assist study, here's this is the top 5 street benzos that we have in assist. Bromazolam is increased, but we've also seen an increase in detections of flubromazepam and gadazepam, and I think they might be some contenders. The market's likely to splinter. People are still likely to take bromazolam, like we still have people taking atizolam. The new benzos might emerge, but if it really has a huge impact to the market, we might see people going back to your prescribed benzos, gabapentinoids, Z drugs, alcohol, other depressant drugs with similar effects. The main drug that we see in postmortem toxicology for the last 3 quarters, the main drug that's been in the assist toxicology project in all 6 quarters, and the main drug that is in treatment referrals for codependency is cocaine. Increasing reports, but what have we seen that's changed? So we've had loads of reports of cocaine, but we've actually seen the types of reports that we're receiving have changed over the 2 years that RADAR has been operational. 90% of cocaine reports in Q1 were cocaine powder. Then we started to get reports that there's a bit more crack. We've got more reports that people were making their own crack. But actually in 2023, it seems like they just get crack from their dealers just like they would with cocaine powder. And now the reports that we have of cocaine, they're 50% crack cocaine, 50% powder cocaine. We also monitor the market, so we know that the street price of cocaine has dropped from an average of maybe £100 to kind of £70, £80 a gram. And the purities went up from an average of 30% to an average of kind of 45%. So they're getting cheaper and more pure, and as a result we're seeing more adverse effects. And the final category of drugs is gabapentinoids. Looking at all our indicators, gabapentinoids are always there, they're always showing up in toxicology, and it's not something that we're really addressing. We've seen today already that actually it's not even split between pregabalin and gabapentin. Most commonly our detections are for pregabalin. And Jason mentioned that it's kind of this counterfeit pharmaceutical. We're calling these super fakes because they look legit. They've got blister packs, they come in boxes, they've got patient leaflets that come with it. And I wanted to really emphasise this because it's not just gabapentinoids that we're seeing being sold in this way, and there's way more kind of online pharmacies driving the supply and availability of these substances. The reason I think we're seeing so many gabapentinoids is they reduce your tolerance to opioids, therefore increasing the overdose risk. So that might mean that people are incentivised to use because they need to use less of their kind of heroin or other opioids, but it could be that people don't know that mixing them both together really increases the risk of overdose, so there's a message there as well. So I'm pretty sure I'm out of time, but to summarise what is on the radar is, although we are seeing opioids out there, and a lot of different opioids, there is an urgent need to expand our treatment options for non-opioid drugs. I could not be more concerned about the emergence of these new synthetic opioids. I think this time next year we're going to be seeing hundreds of detections in our deaths and our hospitalisations. But 90% of the response to these new synthetic opioids is the same for the other drugs that we've been kind of ignoring and neglecting for the last couple of years. I think there's going to be a continued increase in cocaine. We're seeing a continued increase in crack and injecting. I think there's going to be a switch in these benzodiazepines from bromazolam to the next thing. So if you work in a drug service, if you're working with people that take benzos and you're seeing anything change, you can report that to us and let us know. And I also think one of the changes that we're underestimating in the drug supply is this change in availability. We're seeing way more supply online through the open web, the dark web and social media. Like I said, we try to make RADAR accessible to everyone, so if you want to join our network, please do so. Please grab some leaflets, and if you want to read any of our resources, alerts or reports, you can get more information at publichealthscotland.scot/radar.